Hello and welcome to Godless Bitches. I am your host, Clare Wuellner, and with me today are the usuals, Jen Peeples.
Hi, everybody.
And Tracie Harris.
Howdy.
You're right on. And we have a super special guest, Ethan Gregory Dodge.
Hi.
Who
Thanks for having me.
This is going to be awesome. Is well known for his Mormon leaks and faith leaks, and we'll get to that in a minute. So, Godless Bitches 2.0 is a production of the Atheist Community of Austin, an educational nonprofit dedicated to the separation of government and religion and the promotion of positive atheist culture. What's going on, everybody? How are y'all doing this week? Did y'all vote?
We did.
I've early voted.
I early voted. Yeah, me too. Right on. If you haven't voted, please vote on Tuesday. Please, please, please. So important. You may think your vote doesn't count, but I think this is one of the most important elections we've had in my lifetime that I can recollect. Get out there and vote, especially if you're young and think it doesn't count. It really, really matters.
Yeah, there's actually last night on Lawrence O'Donnell's show, Michael Moore was on.
Oh, my.
And he was talking about people who don't vote, who, they've never voted, they don't think it matters. And his message to them was, you have this election in your hands. If you have never voted before, this is exactly why you should vote, because your voice will matter more than normal.
Yeah.
And if enough people, like you, go to the polls and vote, you can influence the election.
Right on.
So vote, please.
Yes, please, please, please.
Hey, not to bring up a production glitch in the middle of the intro, but I can't hear Jen live. Like, I don't think her mic is live.
Oh.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Thanks, guys. Michael Moore says get out there and do it. And he knows everything. He knows all. So get out there and do it. Let's see. So, Ethan, let me give a little bio on Ethan here because he's a pretty amazing dude. He was born and raised in Utah. Ethan considers himself a secular Mormon passionate about truth. A cybersecurity engineer by trade, he currently oversees all technical operations of the Truth and Transparency Foundation, which operates the sites Mormon Leaks and Faith Leaks. He believes strongly that greater empathy and understanding can be achieved through listening to and shared lived experiences. He has a bachelor's degree in information technology from Utah Valley University and blogs at egd.io. And he was a Mormon, deconverted, obviously, and just so you know how famous you are, I have a friend whom I've known since we were both in diapers.
Okay.
She's super religious. I'm not. Marianne, if you're watching, hi. Because she said she wanted to watch this show. She lives in Salt Lake City.
Okay.
And she has told me through the years how much the Mormon Church is the government there.
Oh, yeah.
Just simply is. And you will meet no person more motivated to work for separation of church and state than she.
Oh,
because
cool.
she has seen firsthand what happens when one particular religion gets hold of the state. So,
nice.
And she had heard of you.
Okay.
And she knew about you. She was like, "Oh, that's a big deal." And I was like, "Yeah." So,
Well, she's going to be very interested in an initiative that we're launching this week then. So.
right on. Cool. What is that initiative?
We are, and I could get into this a little bit more if we start talking about the stuff that we've released around sexual assault, but we are...
I'm not hearing Ethan.
Hello?
There.
I'll talk more into the mic here. So there are a number of states that have mandatory reporting laws, but also a number of those states when it comes to child abuse. So if somebody hears about child abuse, they are... required to report it to the authorities. However, in many of those states, there is an exemption for clergy, and Utah is one of those. However, I will preface it is only an exemption if the perpetrator comes and confesses to a member of the clergy, rather than if the survivor comes and confesses, the member of the clergy is required to report. But for whatever reason, Utah state law, if it is the perpetrator of said abuse, the clergy they are not obligated to report it. Excuse me. We are going to make a push to change that.
Right.
So you're saying that anybody else that gets a report like that is required?
I believe in Utah, it's healthcare professionals and educational professionals, but we want to make it to anybody, yeah.
Yeah, I think it should probably be anybody.
In the state of Texas, it is anybody.
I'd be willing to listen to, arguments about why that may or may not be. Sometimes things can be counterintuitive, but I would think that I'd be willing to hear, an argument for everybody having to report that.
I completely agree, and it's a little ironic because Texas is often viewed as a very, very religious state. However, they have one of the best mandatory reporting laws, and they require everybody, if they catch wind of child abuse, whether it's from the perpetrator, the survivor, or somebody else, they need to report it to the authorities. Anybody, doesn't matter who you are.
Right on.
Right.
Yeah. And I want to mention here just briefly, Jan Heimlich, who founded the Child Friendly Faith Project. Mm-hmm. She is a good resource for that. If you want to know more about religious child maltreatment, find her book, look up her organization, Child Friendly Faith Project. She does amazing stuff. So, right. So tell us some interesting stuff. I mean, I looked through your documentation and all the things that you've done, the website. It's amazing stuff. Where do you want to start?
Where do I mean, this is your show. I mean, we could start. I mean, you specifically want to talk about things that go under civil rights and separation of church and state.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's start with a DMCA takedown request that we got from the church a while back. Mm-hmm. It was in March of 2017.
DMAC?
DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act.
Okay.
And so let's back up a little bit. We released a PowerPoint slide deck from the church, and I believe they actually have an image of the slide that was, yep, there it is right there. And you'll see at the top, so that we released a slide deck, and it had this is just one slide from that deck. And at the top, you'll see it says issues and ideas leading people away from the gospel. This was a slide deck that was presented to the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, which is the highest governing body in the Mormon Church, right? And as you could see, this, in my opinion, it looks like shit, and it could easily have been fabricated. We easily could have made this up, right? You'll see that there's a political spectrum from far left, far right, and on the screen that I'm looking at, it's pretty hard to read the bubbles, but each of these bubbles is ideas that they believe that are leading people away from the church. And one of the biggest bubbles you'll see there in the center is pornography. There's also like secular ideas somewhere in there. They also call out specific people. They name people by name, and one of them is John DeLynn, another is Denver Snuffer. They also call out an organization called Ordained Women, which was a movement trying to get women ordained to the Mormon priesthood. And this is very significant because Denver Snuffer, John DeLynn, and Kate Kelly, who founded Ordained Women, were all excommunicated, and they're all mentioned in this particular slide.
Wow.
Right?
This sounds extraordinarily fabricated. I mean, it doesn't make sense. I don't know of anyone who left any religion because they're like, geez, I just need pornography, and it's not, and it's holding me back, this religious business.
Well, if you look at the number of times that Mormons mention pornography in their public speaking engagements, it's incredible.
They're obsessed with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not only that, but just also masturbation, right? Like it's, and I don't know, not all bishops, but a number of bishops do ask very probing questions to youth one-on-one during, as you're growing up in the Mormon Church, asking if you're masturbating, and if you were masturbating, how you are, and to what, all that kind of stuff, right?
Wow.
And it's usually
kind of creepy.
Anyway, there's actually a man named Sam Young who's from Houston, just a couple hours away from here, and he's been doing excellent work to stop that policy. And the church has made some very minor changes that have had little effect, and he's still pushing through. The church actually just excommunicated him like a month ago.
That's kind of a badge of honor, I'm thinking.
Yeah. So anyway, this particular slide, we put it up, and at the time we were not hosting documents on our own server. We were using a third-party service called DocDroid. And the next day, we were getting a lot of shit from people saying that we fabricated that we made it up, that it wasn't legit. The very next day, the church issued a DMCA takedown request to us and Doctoroid. Doctoroid complied immediately because that's just what they do. And so it got taken down, and they sent the DMCA takedown request telling us that they have a copyright on that and that they have and that we
Therefore,
can't publish
it is theirs, and there's no mystery.
So they they absolutely confirmed it. And then a week later, we responded saying that we have every right to publish this under fair use. And for those not familiar with the fair use doctrine, basically you are permitted to republish copyrighted works for the sake of commentary, news reporting, or parody. Within reason, right? And it's not like you're going to release a whole movie and have like 1 second where you're like, I really like this scene, right? That you're not going to be covered under fair use there. But this was obviously very significant to news reporting within Mormonism. Right. So yeah, our lawyer who was representing us at the time, his name is Mark Rondasa. He's a very renowned free speech lawyer in the country.
He's getting his own bubble right now.
He's actually in the middle of representing another famous podcaster from Austin.
Where can we fit another bubble?
He's actually in the middle of representing another famous podcaster from Austin, Alex Jones.
Seriously, wow.
They recently filed a lawsuit against PayPal. Because they're censoring him, right? And Mark Rondasa is representing him. But
interesting.
Anyway, so Rondasa, I should have sent you the letter that he sent to the church, but it was amazing, and he basically just gave the church the big middle finger and said they have every single right to publish this, and if you sue them, we will counter-sue you because this is clearly under fair use, and we never heard back from the church.
Right on.
So
yeah, they're just trying to intimidate.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, really, it'd be great if the church did sue you, because then this would be front and center all over the place, plus other stuff that you have.
Well, so the Washington Post ended up covering the story. The fact that we republished this, the Streisand effect is real. For those not familiar with that term, Barbara Streisand, somebody took a picture of her house in the Caribbean and she didn't want it down. She didn't want it there, so she got them to take it down or something like that. But because she did that, it disseminated all over the internet, right? So it was the exact same thing. It was, and Mark Rondasa actually referenced that in his letter, because you trying to put this out has, I think he used the analogy of knocking a candle onto dry leaves and starting a brush fire or something like that. So yeah, and like I said, they completely confirmed the veracity of this document and its authenticity, and yeah, so that is kind of, we launched in December of 2016, and this happened in March of 2017, and that's kind of that was the first big national attention that we'd gotten about something we had released. We got quite a bit of attention for actually launching, but we hadn't released anything that got national attention until that point.
I have a question. Did you get much response from regular Mormons as to what they thought about the slide, if they didn't believe it was real, or did any of did they have a voice in anything?
Yeah, so we got that they were the people that were accusing us of having fabricated it.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and that's typically, that seems to be a theme. If anything looks even slightly like it could have been fabricated or fake, we usually get active Mormons start pinging us like crazy on Facebook.
So was there any backlash when the church actually stepped up and owned it?
For those Mormons? No. We just kind of let it speak for itself.
Never mind.
Yeah. Well, so the exact same thing happened when we got another DMCA takedown request. So we got a set of documents that were written by a man named Bruce R. McConkie, who is arguably the most influential man in modern Mormonism, and he's passed away. He was a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles for a long time, and he wrote a book called Mormon Doctrine that was used as the de facto source and authoritative source on Mormon doctrine, right, for a long time. And it was published by the church, and he said some very controversial things in there. Like I was telling Claire before the show, he took the whole people of color are people of color because they were cursed before this life. He took that to a whole nother level, right? He called the Book of Mormon references a great and abominable church, and he straight up called that the Catholic Church in his book. So there's many more controversies in that book, and he ended up having to publish a second edition very quickly, like within a year, or actually I don't know how quickly, but so don't quote me on that. But anyway, Anyway, so you get the point. He's extremely influential. A lot of the things that he said in this book aren't necessarily actively taught by the church anymore, but are still believed by a lot of your everyday Mormons. We got a bunch of his works, including things that had never been published before. And I think there were a total of 90 documents that we got from this particular source that were written by the hand of Bruce McConkie.
Wow.
That had never been published. And the most fascinating one, none of them were like super intense or like super new or anything. The most fascinating one was actually his firsthand account. He was in the Salt Lake Temple when the Quorum of the 12 Apostles and the first presidency is just slightly high. That's the president of the church and his two counselors, and then there's the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, and all 15 of them. They have to, before policy is made, they have to vote unanimously on it. So these 15 men are the most powerful men in the church, right? And he was there as a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles in the Salt Lake City Temple when they decided to ordain people of color to the Mormon priesthood. That was in June of 1978, right? And one of the documents that we got was his firsthand account going through the events that happened in the Salt Lake Temple that day and what led to that decision. And it was absolutely fascinating. Nothing like, other than the fact that they were voting on this in 1978, nothing like bad against the church in this document, right? Mm-hmm. It didn't make the church look bad in any way. It was just an incredible piece of Mormon history. And that was my personal favorite. But anyway, we released those. We released them on Pioneer Day, which is July 24th. And we did that on purpose. That's a Utah state holiday. That's when Brigham Young and the Mormons got to the Salt Lake Valley. Yeah. And then I believe on the 25th or the 26th, we got a DMCA takedown request from the McConkie family because they own copyright on those. And it was funny because we got the exact same response from active Mormons. These had typos in them. Like it was literally somebody going through their grandfather or father's journals and typing them up, right? And they had lots of typos, and we left them there. We didn't go through and fix those typos, and we just published them as is. Right. And everyone was like, you totally made I think someone texted us and said, so when are you going to own up to the fact that you fabricated these, right? And then 2 hours later, we got the DMCA takedown request, right?
When you get that, do you just publish that? Hey.
So we have arrived.
FYI. The first, verifying that in fact this is legit, right?
Yeah. And the first DMCA request we got, we did publish that almost immediately, within an hour after getting it. The second one, we waited until we had our response ready to publish that, and that was because we had released 37. McConkie we call them the McConkie papers. We had released 37 McConkie papers, and we had an additional 53 to publish. And so we released the takedown request that they sent us, our response, and the remaining 53 all on the same day.
Oh, cool.
Oh my! If that isn't the large middle finger, I don't know what is.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing like a DMCA takedown request to validate, to authenticate your documents,
right? And draw light to it.
Yeah.
So, there's controversy.
Yeah.
It's interesting though, because I've been noticing in other areas this sort of weird phenomenon of people objecting to things that they really don't care about,
right?
And that's kind of what you're describing, right? So they object to the information, or they object to the slide, they object to the document, basically saying oh, this is, just trying to slander us and say these horrible things about us and make us look ridiculous. And then when they find out it's real, nothing changes. Yep. They don't respond in any way that's wow, I can't believe that our church is doing this, that we put this out. So really, they didn't object to the slide. They didn't really object to the documents. It's they're just objecting to object because the impact is nothing
Yeah.
on these people. So they're just trying to kind of object to you.
Yeah.
And they really don't care what's in the slide or what's in the document because it's not going to change anything about how they view the church. So they act like you're slandering them. And then when they find out that what you're saying is actually legitimate, they don't go back to their church and say, what the heck?
Yeah.
So they don't even care. So they're just making this, tempest in a teapot that they don't even think is legitimate, like as a complaint against the church.
Yeah, and that happens to us all the time. People will sit like a lot. Like I'll see Twitter conversations about documents that we've released, the citing documents we've released, and then the person will come back and say, "We can't believe anything Mormon Leaks releases. It's all lies. It's all." It's all hearsay. And then we typically respond and we say, if you can point us to something we've released that is not authentic, we will gladly retract it. And if you can prove to us with it beyond a reasonable doubt that it is not authentic, we will gladly retract it. Nobody has ever come back. And so they're basing it off of nothing because I stand by everything we've released to this point.
But they don't even care, really.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
It's like they don't care if the doc's legit or not because even when they're confronted with evidence with their own church saying, yes, this is legit, it doesn't matter to them.
Yeah.
So it's like, why even object to it in the first place?
Right.
Well, you're not supposed to question. That's the culture.
Exactly.
And you were questioning, and they try to have that same power over you that they would have on anybody else in their church. And it falls flat. Oops.
Yeah.
Well,
Welcome to the real world.
I think what Tracie's talking about kind of speaks to a larger phenomena we're seeing right now because in certain political arenas, actual racism is not a problem.
Right.
The accusation of being a racist is the problem.
Yes.
Right.
That they object to. But the actual racism itself, they have no problem with. Just don't call me a racist.
Yeah. And you see people making a big, stink about the idea of something comes out and it's like this is some racist thing and it's like no that person is lying and they and then when it comes out at the end of the day if you ask them what if they were telling the truth, if we can demonstrate they're telling the truth, would it matter? And the answer is no.
No, it doesn't change.
Because we've seen this like again and again and again where it's like something comes out and it's like, oh, this is just disparaging crap that you're trying to, and then when more information comes out and it's like, oh, that really did happen, that goalpost gets moved and it's like, well, that's okay then. And it's like, well, if it was okay with you, why did you kick up such a fuss and throw such a tantrum over the information when it came out, pretending that this was some sort of an attack and an assault, when really you don't even think there's anything wrong with it. You're just making a fuss.
And
it's ridiculous.
To be fair, there are I completely 100% agree with you, and that's what the majority do. But I have had active Mormons that have either apologized or come to us and be like, wow, that I do have a problem with what this document presents now that I know that it's true, right? Or and to be honest with you, like a lot of people accuse us, like the church has done a really good job of labeling us as anti-Mormon, right? And that's kind of the key term that as soon as somebody's labeled as that, Mormons won't pay attention to you and automatically disbelieve everything you're saying. But there are a lot of people that understand our mission of transparency, right, within the church. And we do have, I'm not going to say a ton of supporters, but we do have supporters within the church that understand what we're trying to do. And there have been a lot of people that have come to me and said, like, thanks, like I am now on my way out of the church because of something that I found out about you, about the church through something that you released. And a lot of people accuse us that that's our end goal, is to get people out of the church. But to be honest with you, I'm of the opinion, if you're happy in the church, stay in the church. If you're happy you're out of the church, get out of the church, right? And I myself was much happier outside of the church, so I left. But at the end of the day, I just want people to make an informed decision about what they're supporting.
Well, there's an irony to saying you're just trying to get people out of our church by publishing our documents publicly. That's really my doing.
How dare you drive people away
it
from our
down,
church
right?
by publishing what we actually believe.
And what we actually do.
And a lot of these religious people are so into the idea of personal responsibility.
Yeah.
And yet it's not what you published, it's that somebody made the public aware of what you published, right? So it's not it's their responsibility for telling people what you actually said and not your responsibility for having said it.
Yep.
Exactly.
But, the thing is, that isn't unique to Mormonism, though.
No, it's not at all.
I mean, you confront almost any religious believer with some of the more unsavory aspects of their beliefs.
I think it's a personality type. Like I think there are just some people that are like that, and they for whatever reason, I think it correlates to certain types of groups.
And I think that religious groups in particular, especially very insular religious groups, kind of cultivate that attitude in their followers. You know, and it's easy to do when you tell people, oh, questioning this is a sin in and of itself. You're not even allowed to ask the question. Mm-hmm. And so when you can't even ask the question, of course you're not going to get the answer.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of their response, of course, is fear. Because you're poking the sin lion.
And the church has made significant efforts to be more transparent, especially about its history. The Mormon Church typically paints Joseph Smith as this flawless human being, and they literally have a scripture that says he's done more for mankind save Jesus alone, right? And they're doing a better job. I would like to see them do a whole lot more than what they're doing, but they're doing a whole lot better job of presenting him in as a normal human being with flaws, and that he was into treasure hunting, and that he found this seer stone, and that's what he used to translate the gold plates into the Book of Mormon, and rather than an Urim and Thummim, and he actually translated like the South Park episode where Joseph Smith puts a rock in a hat and reads the words of the Book of Mormon. That's how it happened. That's not how I learned it happened, right? My whole life, right?
The flawlessness thing, I think, ties into this, to like what we're talking about here, because it's almost like with these documents, you'll put something up, they'll look at it and say, this is a negative thing, this is disparaging about my beliefs, and I don't believe it's true. Then you say, like, this is true, and they say, well, in that case, it's okay, I don't care, I'm not going to talk about it anymore. It's just like, all right. So it's almost like, and I was thinking this before you started to talk about the flawless perspective, I was thinking how these are people that it's really difficult for them to say, I support this group and their overall mission, but I have problems with this aspect of it. Right? Like they're not capable of that, of saying that this part bothers me, but I'm not going to disassociate because there's all these other things that don't bother me, but I am willing to criticize this and to work to improve this aspect. There's this thing where it's just like, this can't, that when you showed me this, I objected to it. When you showed me it was legitimately part of what my group was doing, suddenly I don't object anymore. It's about that flawlessness, right? If Joseph Smith did it and it's horrible, or if you say he did it and it's horrible, when I find out that no, he really did do it, then it's unacceptable because he's flawless. So it's this weird thing where these people are like defending this personality or this ideology to the point that they are afraid to criticize any aspect of it. That's the weird thing.
Yeah, and we see that all the time because the church released an essay recognizing it used to always, growing up, I was always taught Brigham Young absolutely practiced polygamy. Joseph Smith did not, right? Joseph Smith totally did, right? He had many wives and some as young as 14 years old, right? And the church released an essay recognizing that in 2013. And all of a sudden, because the church said that and publicly recognized it, those of us who didn't know that, like myself, are all of a sudden gaslighted by people who supposedly did know that and be like, the church has always said that and owned up to this fact. Yeah. And I'm like, no, I grew up in Utah Valley, Utah. 95% of my elementary school, junior high school, and high school was Mormon. Right, I went to church every Sunday. I went on a Mormon mission, and I didn't know this stuff. Right, like you can't tell me that the church actively, and they're like, well, that's your fault because you didn't study hard enough. We actually wrote a Ryan McKnight. I should mention he's my him and I do Mormon Leaks and Faith Leaks together, and he was actually I came into the Mormon Leaks scene. I helped him launch the website, and he had already released some stuff unofficially, not necessarily under the Mormon Leaks name before I ever got involved. But anyway, him and we wrote an op-ed that appeared in the Salt Lake Tribune calling the church out for gaslighting because, and the title was The Gaslighting Within Mormonism Must Stop. And it was because a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, his name's M. Russell Ballard, in a meeting that was broadcast globally online, he said that the church has never hid anything from anybody. right? And we called him out in that because that is so demonstrably false. It's not even funny.
Yeah.
Here's our takedown notice.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Oops.
So,
I mean, you could almost, title that op-ed 1984 in Utah.
yeah, yeah.
1984 is exactly the thing I was
Yeah.
thinking. Wow,
Yeah.
you did not just think that. It's wrong. The opposite is true.
Yeah.
Now, I want to get to something about how you get these documents. Because you have a way of leaking documents. Can you describe that?
So that's actually how I got involved. Let me give just a really quick backstory. Ryan, so what I said a while ago that this was the first time we got national attention, that was I was kind of fibbing, I realized after I said that, because Ryan, before the site actually launched in December 2016, in October 2016, he created a YouTube channel called Mormon Leaks and released 15 videos of private meetings with the Quorum of the 12 Apostles in which they were being briefed by various people in various professions, right? And that made the New York Times. The New York Times wrote several articles about it. It was a big deal, and it was mostly a big deal because Senator Gordon Smith, I believe is his name, from Oregon. He's no longer a senator, but he's Mormon, and he was one of the people that was briefing the Quorum of the 12 in there. And he straight up said that he voted for the war in Iraq in hopes that it would help the Mormon Church spread their influence there, right?
Oh, wow.
So that fact alone is what made it national news. Anyway, so when Ryan got a lot of attention for releasing those, and he went on a podcast in which he explained how he got the documents. And that's when I approached him. I'd be like, look, your source left like digital fingerprints all over the place that could be traced back to them. I am a digital forensics professional. Let me help you protect your sources. And that's how I got involved. And we have a submission system called Secure Drop, which is it's a program written by the Freedom of the Press Foundation, meant specifically for this purpose. Publications such as the New York Times and the New Yorker and the Washington Post and the Guardian, they use the exact same thing to get anonymous sources. The Intercept also uses it. They're very closely related with the Freedom of the Press Foundation. But anyway, so I think there's a total of like 75 news organizations using it, and we're one of them. And what it does is it uses what's called the Tor Network, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it's a hidden network that you have to use special software to connect to, and it doesn't track your IP address, and everything's encrypted. And I'm not going to get into the huge technical details here of how that all works, but it does a really good job at keeping keeping you anonymous. You can never, ever keep somebody 100% anonymous. That's just completely impossible with the way our technology works today. But you can be pretty sure that they're going to be anonymous, right? And so we use that, and everything is it goes to our server via Tor, and then it's encrypted on our server, and then we have to download it, and then we have to decrypt it, and then we review it, and then we redact any information that the source requests us to redact, and we almost always respect those wishes, unless we are really big. A document needs to stand on its own. So if we feel like the redactions from the source are going to take away from some context that isn't going to bring that gives a lot of significance to the document, we will push them on that and then come to an agreement there. But yeah, and we also have a process of like PDFs. I do a lot of cleaning before we release it to make sure that we don't leave any trace or fingerprint of the source. I don't know if you three are familiar with Reality Winner. And
yes.
Yeah.
I'm not.
So just quick story. Reality Winner was a NSA contractor, and she leaked something to the Intercept, and the Intercept released it. And there was what she had done was she had printed it on an NSA printer, and then scanned it. And she did that to get rid of any digital fingerprints that may have been in the PDF that she downloaded, right? And then scanned that and sent that scan to the Intercept. Well, the printer left a fingerprint on the document, and the Intercept didn't clean it. They were able, and the fingerprint said what printer, like it didn't straight up say, but it was like a series of dots that they could decode, and it indicated what printer, the model of printer that it was printed at, and at the time. And so they were able to go back in their security camera footage and see who was at that printer at that time. They saw it was Reality Winner. They convicted her, and she was just sentenced to, I think, 6 years in prison for that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. There's this thing called paper, pen. Wow.
Yeah. So it's the protecting sources is very hard, but also very important. We have a completely different what's called a threat model than the Intercept does. We're not releasing government documents. Like, people most likely are not going to go to prison for getting us but they very well could lose their jobs.
I would think too they
right?
would have a record of who was downloading the document at some point.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
You could, if nothing
definitely.
else, you could just say, well, who the heck has been downloading this in the last couple of days or weeks?
Most definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
metadata, it's a bitch.
Yeah.
Get you every time.
Yeah.
Wow. Jeez. So I was curious. You said that he had written down McConkie the whole process. What does that process look like?
That is a great question. So I'd have to. It's been a while since I read it, but I know that they all. Man, I should send you the link, and so you could put it in the show notes or something.
Okay.
But I believe they all. So they were in the celestial room of the Salt Lake Temple, and the celestial room is the.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. It's like that's where. In the Mormon temple rituals, that's like the very last place that you end up, and it's an extremely special place for a lot of Mormons, and it's very sacred. And they were there.
Now I feel bad that I mocked.
Oh no! Don't feel bad at all. Don't feel bad at all. I'm just trying to paint it here. But they also, you know what? They may not been in the celestial room. They may have been in a room called the Holy of Holies, which is specifically for the Quorum of the 12 Apostles.
That sounds like one you could mock.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, oh, that's different. Okay.
Anyway, they were in some very important room in the Salt Lake Temple, and they ended up doing. They were praying together. There were 13 of them rather than 15. Which is very interesting because it was actually the two that were absent. One was on a trip for the church, and the other one was in the hospital. And it is speculated, and I don't know that I have any source to back this up other than what historians have told me, that those were the two most racist members of those 15 men. So they purposely did this vote while they were gone.
What was the vote?
Whether or not to ordain people of color to the priesthood. And to allow them to get married in the temple.
Right?
Had to be unanimous, yeah. So even if one person voted no, they couldn't do it. And supposedly too, again, this is what I've been told by historians, they had tried to have this vote a number of times before, but because of one of those two, it just never worked out because it was never unanimous, right?
Okay, so they sit and they pray, and
they prayed, and they did.
This blows my mind. Okay,
yeah.
keep going.
So they prayed, and I believe Spencer W. Kimball, who was the president of the church at the time, even went into a separate room himself and prayed by himself because he's the prophet of God and he's the one that can receive the specific revelation. And then I believe he came out and said, "Yeah, we're going to do it," right, or something like that. And then.
What, do they vote down God? Yeah. Sorry. I'm not in favor of
and
this.
I believe I'm going to send you the link so we could be for sure, but I believe they did what's called a prayer circle, which is it's an important ritual within Mormonism in which you pray together in a circle, essentially, right?
Do they have to hold hands? Is it got to be a connected circle?
You know, so now I'm like second guessing myself of whether or not they did a prayer circle because women have to be present. The same number of women have to be present in a prayer circle as men.
It was the drums.
So I don't know exactly what it was. And there's no women in the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. There were no women in the room when they were doing this. So anyway, obviously I'm butchering the story. So I'm going to send it to you.
Yeah,
so that your listeners can call me out on getting it wrong.
I just wonder what I was thinking. You know, you have 13 people, and they're all going to have a lot of different opinions, and it's kind of yay or nay. And if somebody's on the border, they're like, so what's God saying to you? Yeah. You know, I mean, how do they change one another's minds. That has to happen,
I'm
right?
still at the point where I'm like, what is the point of one person going and coming out and being the prophet of God and saying God says we have to do this and having a vote? Like, I don't.
Well, Mormons do that every Sunday. In that, like, so when you are given a what's called a calling or otherwise an assignment within your congregation, or Mormons call it ward. When you're given a calling in your ward, it's supposed to be voted on by your ward. And you're supposed you stand up and they say brother so and so or sister so and so has been called to do this calling. All those in favor, please make it manifest, and everybody raises their right hand. Any opposed, also make it manifest. And anybody, if they are opposed, can raise their hand. I never, my entire life, saw anyone vote opposed, ever. They do the same thing in General Conference once a year. General Conference is a big meeting that the Mormons hold in Salt Lake City, and they broadcast it to all their members worldwide. All the members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles and the First Presidency speak, and they sustain the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, and they do the same thing. All those in favor, make it manifest. All opposed, please indicate. And a lot of people have started going and voting opposed at General Conference.
So they had to look that up? Like somebody
Like, what do we do?
And they all just sit there.
Yeah.
I don't
No,
know.
so what they do is they invite them, well, not then and there, but after them. Well, in General Conference, they don't do it like that. They just say that the opposition has been noted, but then they still go about their normal business. And I would imagine in a local congregation, they would invite those who voted opposed to come up after the meeting and vote and explain why they vote opposed, right?
Yeah, justify your decision to reject the word of God.
Exactly. Yeah.
What if God told me to oppose it?
Yeah.
Like I prayed before the meeting. And
This reminds me of, like, if you've ever been to a tent revival. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I have. It's scary.
And then they have the people speaking in tongues. So they fall out, they're speaking in tongues. It's gibberish. Well, the funny thing is when somebody falls down next to him and starts translating, and then you get the other guy that comes over and they get into an argument about the translation.
Wow. What if the person who translates in tongues?
Well, and then the person,
telephone
and then the person speaking in tongues sits up completely loose and says, "No, that's not what it was."
It's like that
Then you got a three-way argument going on.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's hilarious. Which that often happens in like Sunday school, in Mormon Sunday school, right? Where like, no, somebody's like, no, the doctrine's not that way. It's actually this way. Well, no, I interpret it like this. And it's like, well, isn't that why we're supposed to have like a unified church that can actually clarify this doctrine for us? That I got in so many debates in church.
I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah. So
The whole questioning thing. Yeah, I've done that. I was raised Catholic, and I thought I was going to get married in the Catholic Church. Okay. And that meant meeting with the priest. And I asked him some questions, and I wasn't real keen on the answers. So why can't women be priests? And his answer was that just as men cannot bear children, women cannot be priests. And I was like, wait a minute.
So
there's some organ there that I'm...
some organ that
Yeah.
that men have that give them the priesthood.
Yeah. And the other thing was he wanted me to sign a document that said I would remain open to children. And I said, how am I supposed to have a life and do what you're actually asking me to do?
Right.
He's like, well, blah, blah. It's just so much baloney, and that was the end of it. Yeah. So separation of church and state, super important to this organization, super important to the country.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have put out a lot of information about that being violated in Utah.
Yeah.
Tell us about some of the more interesting stories.
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now we're actually being sued by Brigham Young University, which
That's
is
quite an honor.
Up
here, man. Awesome.
Thank you. It's super ironic because I grew up in Provo, Utah. I was a huge BYU football fan, right? And like my dad had season tickets from the time I was 5. We went to all the home games, so much fun. And then as when I left the church, I had this internal ethical dilemma of whether or not I still support BYU football and all this stuff. And I was like, I could support the team, but not the church, and that's fine because BYU also has a really shady past in a lot of things. And then when they issued this lawsuit, and it's funny because I'll get into the details, but it's actually my name on the lawsuit. It says Ethan Dodge on behalf of Truth and Transparency Foundation, right? Wow. And that was my last straw. I was like, fine, nope, you're done. I don't support BYU football anymore.
You're dead to me now.
Yeah. So we're being sued by them, and to understand why, we need to go back to March of this year when we released a audio recording of a fairly high up, not super high up, leader. He was the president of what's called the MTC, the Missionary Training Center in Provo, Utah, where they send all their missionaries to learn the languages that they're going to be speaking on their missions and how to teach the gospel in those languages. And when I was there were probably about 2,000 to 3,000 missionaries there. This happened in 1984. I don't know how many missionaries were there at the time. I would imagine it was pretty similar though, maybe 1,500 to 2,000. And he was president of the MTC. And we released an audio recording of him admitting to sexually molesting women under his authority. Wow. Specifically, female missionaries at the MTC, right?
Did he just not know he was being recorded?
No, he did not, no. Okay. So this is the story.
Because sometimes men admit to sexually molesting women and they know they're being recorded.
Yeah.
So he was actually confronted by one of his survivors.
Wow.
And she originally posed as a reporter, or like a biographer of some sort, right? That was doing a book, and he was going to be part of the book. So she started asking him all these questions about his life, and then all of a sudden the tape is like 2 hours long. Like a half hour into the tape, she changes gears and says, I can't remember exactly what she said, but she says like, you raped me in the MTC, right? Like, do you remember me? I am so and so.
Wow.
You took me into the basement of the MTC. You ripped my blouse as I was trying to get away from you. And you pulled up my skirt, and you didn't penetrate because you couldn't get an erection. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's pretty gutsy.
She's badass.
Right? Oh my God.
And he said he did not remember that particular instance, but he did remember her.
Oh God.
At the time when we released the tape, the woman was anonymous. She is now not anonymous. Her name is McKenna Denson. She is suing the church for this particular instance.
Good.
Anyway, to get to how we are being sued by BYU is she reported shortly after making that. She made that recording in December of 2017. Shortly after, or maybe shortly before, she reported that to BYU police because the MTC is under BYU police's jurisdiction.
So now on the recording, is he accused of it or did he admit to it?
Thank you. So
You're welcome.
Yeah, cliffhanger there. No, so he did not admit to raping her. He did admit to molesting other women throughout his life under his authority in various assignments in the church.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, including one female missionary that was in the MTC at the same time as McKenna Denson. What he says is that he was giving her a back rub and it got frisky. That's what he says in the tape, right? So
because back rubs are always appropriate in that context.
In that, power dynamics matter.
Yeah,
a lot.
So, anyway, and then he told a couple other stories. He admits to being he calls himself a sex addict in the tape.
Oh, of course. Yeah, he's struggling.
Yeah. That's exactly how he frames it. He frames it as he has an addiction, and anyway.
You say Mormons are obsessed with porn?
Yeah. Gosh. So there actually are some interesting statistics that like Pornhub has released that a big chunk of their traffic comes from Provo, Utah.
Right.
But
well, wait, I've
it's
got a
research.
question on, so was the tape somehow tied to the lawsuit, or is that a separate issue? Or?
So we released the tape before the lawsuit was ever filed.
Okay.
We released it. The AP wrote a story that was carried in the New York Times, Washington Post, and a bunch of other big publications. And the Salt Lake Tribune was all over the story, covering it in a lot of detail. The Salt Lake Tribune is an incredible publication. They actually won a Pulitzer Prize 2 years ago for covering the rape culture at BYU. Did some fantastic work. Peggy Fletcher Stack, she is the head religion reporter there, and she does absolutely incredible work. She's been there a long time and has had a very successful career. Anyway, so we released the tape, and then McKenna, about a month later, filed her lawsuit and had a press conference immediately after filing the lawsuit, and that's when she came out publicly and said, "I'm the woman in the tape."
Okay, but I thought you said, so when you're named on the suit, or is that a separate suit?
This is a separate suit. So yeah,
Okay.
sorry. So she is suing the church for this particular case, right?
Yes.
And then she reported the case. She reported the rape to BYU police. Either I can't remember if it was before or after the tape, but it was like a matter of like days before or after she recorded the tape. And the BYU police immediately went down to where he lives. So this guy's name is Joseph Bishop, and he lives in Phoenix, Arizona. This is public information. That's why I feel comfortable saying it. They went and they interviewed him, and they recorded the interview. Right.
Okay.
They were kind of sloppy, right? And they released two different versions of the police report of this that had different redactions. And one of the redactions
that resulted in a total report.
Not necessarily. So we got our hands on a redaction that said that they recorded the audio. Excuse me. The police report that they released to the media shortly after we released the tape had redacted that part that they had recorded the interview. Then we released our version saying, look, they've recorded this interview. We have now issued what's called a grandma request, which is Utah's open record law. We've issued a grandma request asking for this particular tape.
Right.
They came back. I was the one that filed the grandma request, which is why my name's on the suit. They came back. They, they denied me. And then I appealed to the State Records Committee. We then had a hearing in front of the State Records Committee. The State Records Committee ruled in our favor.
Okay.
And their argument is that they are a private university, and so they are not subject to open record requests. That's their argument.
Okay.
But in my opinion, if you have the power to arrest and use lethal force, you should absolutely be subject to open record requests.
Right, they're carrying out a government function.
So
Exactly.
they ruled in your favor on this?
The State Records Committee ruled in our favor.
Okay.
However, the Salt Lake Tribune, it's extremely interesting because
It is.
that same story. This is a big web of
certainly is.
of interesting things. But anyway, so the Salt Lake Tribune and BYU are in the middle of a case themselves over this exact same issue. The same story that I told you that they won a Pulitzer Prize for. They still have an open records request requesting a police report of an instance where a woman was raped on campus, right? And the police will not release it because they say that they
don't have to, right?
Yeah, they don't have to because they're so the Salt Lake Tribune sues them, right?
I'm waiting to see how this ends up with somebody suing you.
Yeah,
right?
That's the good part.
That's going to be the twist. This is wild.
The Salt Lake Tribune sues BYU. A judge, they go through the hearing and everything. The Salt Lake Tribune says they need to release this, blah, blah, blah. BYU says, we don't need to release this, blah, blah, blah. We then have our hearing like 3 days before the judge in that case issues her verdict, right? And the attorney general or somebody from the attorney general's office was at our hearing saying whatever is ruled by the State Records Committee needs to be put on hold until Judge Laura Scott, who's the one who issued this verdict, rules and decides whether or not BYU has to hand over that police report, because that will set precedent in this instance, right? And so they ruled in our favor with that caveat. Like, we have to wait for that. Like 2 or 3 days later, Judge Scott issues the verdict saying BYU absolutely does have to release it, right?
Yes. Good.
right? And then I'm a little fuzzy on the timeline here. BYU ended up appealing to the state Supreme Court. And the state Supreme Court has accepted the case, and they are going to hear it. So that's still in limbo. So we still have not gotten the tape, right, of their interview with Joseph Bishop. Where they sue us here, they are suing us and the State Records Committee for ruling in our favor.
Wow.
That's laughable.
They are basically trying to. They're basically
laughable.
asking the court to overturn the state records.
Right, but the thing is, if the SCOTUS ruling comes down in their favor, then they might have some standing on this other side.
Yeah. To be clear, it's the state Supreme Court, not the Supreme Court of the U.S.
Oh,
it's the Utah
okay.
State Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, that's good clarification. But
Yeah. So that and we actually entered a stay with BYU that our case is put on hold until the state Supreme Court rules on there. So nothing is going to happen, and so we're probably not going to get this tape for a number of years until that happens. And who knows if they'll appeal again.
So they're suing the body that ruled in your favor, and they're suing you basically for asking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and so that is, so that's a very good instance of separation of church and state. Like, while BYU police may receive the majority of their funding through the church, which, by the way, I've never seen any official data on that, where their funding comes from. Right, I'm sure it's out there. I've never looked, but anyway. Despite that fact, like I said, they have the power to arrest. They have the power to use lethal force. They are acting as a government entity in there. And they should be they should be subject to open records requests.
Absolutely.
End of story. So that's
a hell of a story.
It is. That was interesting.
Yeah, it's to be honest with you, when we got the lawsuit, I was like, you got to be fucking kidding me. Like, you guys are so stupid.
That seems like more of the religious culture you may not question.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is interesting too, because it's like you're saying, you get all these people that are, I mean, you're saying the mission here is transparency, and you're asking for a record, and you're saying, why shouldn't this be public? And they're fighting you on this. And you have to wonder how that looks to the average Mormon. Like, are there some people, like you said, it might not impact everyone, but there's going to be people on the fence that are just like, why would my church
why
fight
would they hide this?
releasing information that might help sexual assault victims, right?
Right.
Which somebody actually tweeted that the other day, something along those lines, and I retweeted it saying, be careful, that's how I ended up leaving the church.
Yeah.
Because that's exactly what it was. Like, I believed very strongly in government transparency, right? And then but then I never held that same standard to my religion. And then when I started to, that's when I realized that they had so much to hide. And that's why they weren't giving it to me. And therefore the church was not what I thought it was.
And it is just such a scary mindset to go back to that thing from earlier. The person who sits there and just says, but this is what my church is doing, and so this is what I'm going to defend. And if you attack my church for it, then you're the bad guy, not the church for trying to make it difficult to get information out about sexual assault within their own ranks.
Yeah. You're riding the crest on this giant wave because it's you, the Mormons, and the Jehovah's Witness problems, and the Catholic Church. Everybody is finally saying enough is enough.
Yeah.
So,
well, I'm glad you mentioned Jehovah's Witnesses, because Faith Leaks, which we launched around this time last year, because we launched it because we were having a lot of success with Mormon Leaks, and we were getting people from other former members of other denominations saying, we need this in our religion, right? And so, but none of them wanted to do the work with us, and so we're like, okay, we'll just do one blanket Faith Leaks for every religious organization. For now, we've decided to keep Mormon Leaks separate. It's possible that we may merge them. It may make sense later, but right now, Faith Leaks hasn't gotten nearly the amount of attention as Mormon Leaks, and that's just because we understand the implications and processes and procedures of our documents within Mormonism, because we're both ex-Mormons, right? But up to this point, Faith Leaks has actually only released documents pertaining to Jehovah's Witnesses. And the first thing that we released was a series of letters back and forth between a congregation in Massachusetts and Watchtower, which is their governing body, covering up a sex abuse case in that congregation. And the perpetrator did absolutely disgusting things that I don't want to detail here because it will make you sick, to his daughters. Right. Wow. So anyway, that was the first thing that we released. And we released a number of things there, but a number of other things, all pertaining to the Jehovah's Witness Church so far. But that was by far the biggest, and that also, obviously, I put that under sexual assault when I sent you the list of topics because, we haven't covered sexual assault just in Mormonism, but also Jehovah's Witnesses. And as you said, this is a problem. This problem is actually what got me, wanted me. That's why I wanted to get involved with Mormon Leagues, because while there was always the suspicion that there was some sort of sexual abuse. I don't buy that it's happening on like a grand scale and it's like orchestrated by the church or anything like that, right? A lot of people are really into that kind of conspiracy theories, but you can't get an organization as big and as influential as the Mormon Church and there not be some sort of sex abuse or even a cover-up. That's just statistically impossible.
Sure.
And the same thing applies to all religions. So,
or to all big groups where you're going to have children involved. I mean, but I guess that's the thing. I remember that attitude, when I was in church, and that whole, because there's so much judgment, right? And so much focus on your lifestyle. Right. And are you doing the right thing? And are you, doing the wrong thing? And are you sinning? But what happens is it fosters a culture of shame that keeps people from wanting to come forward because they're ashamed of what they've done. And ultimately, that's what you're describing, right? So it's like instead of telling people to be out and open about whatever mistakes they might make so that we can help you improve and work on things and everyone can get better and nobody's perfect, and so it's not like a healthy attitude, right? And so when you address people that are religious, a lot of times the knee-jerk you get back is, well, have you ever done anything wrong? Like, no one's perfect, and it's like, but that's not, there's a difference between nobody's perfect and I accept that you have things that maybe, might not be perfect about you and everyone can work on stuff. That's like a healthy attitude to have where you can just be out and open about your stuff. But there are so many people that are in religions that feel like they need to hide what they're doing. Like they don't want people to find out because the attitude is one of condemnation and judgment, not improvement, right? It's never for a good, let's help you get better. It's like, let's condemn it and, fix things that aren't broken. It's like so weird. And so then when you have that at a church level, it's just sort of more of that. It's just like that same attitude that you have on a personal level, except it's sort of on steroids at the organizational level, where something comes up and instead of saying, whoa, we can't tolerate this in our ranks, this needs to be exposed, this needs to be talked about, we need to fix this, we need to confront this, look at it, examine it, investigate this and figure out the solution here to make sure this doesn't happen again. We're certainly not going to cover it up and hide it and help it foster. And so they don't address it with any sort of attitude of guilt, which is that emotion that sort of eats at you until you come clean, right? Guilt is that emotion that drives you to tell about what you did because you feel real remorse about what happened. But shame is when you just are compelled to cover it up because you're afraid other people are going to look at you and judge you. It's like completely unhealthy.
Yeah. Another unhealthy thing that church brings into it, I think. I was a part of a church, and I, at that time, had small children. And a person who was a member of the church confessed to the pastor that he was a convicted child molester. And the pastor said that he wanted to, this person, the molester, wanted to be active in the church. And the pastor called together anybody who wanted to meet to decide whether this person could be a part of the church. And the forgiveness sort of attitude, the culture was dangerous because when it comes to child molestation, the very number one thing that is correlated with recidivism is proximity. And this church had a large religious education program with lots of kids. There was no way he was going to be able to avoid children. And so all the parents said, no, absolutely not. But there were just enough voices there that said, we really need to give him a second chance. He's come to you. He's asked for blah, blah, blah. And I thought, that's just stupid. You're really ignorant. And so the sum of the meeting was, we're going to let the guy be part of the church. The next day, he was arrested for molesting another kid.
Oh my God.
So, yeah, there's the shame. Church does all sorts of great things. There's the shame that makes it evil and you don't get help. And then if you do reach out for help, instead of getting the proper sort of help,
Right.
they're like, oh, let's just welcome him back into the fold.
Yeah, let's forgive him and put him back in with kids.
Yeah.
That's not the idea of being open about a thing is to find real solutions, not to just say, now we've all been open about it, let's just go back to what we were doing before. That's useless, right? You have to do like what we would call it, work a debrief or a lessons learned, where you get together and you say, what went wrong? And how do we fix this? I remember how that culture of shame impacted my early career, like when I was working, because I used to have this horrible fear that if I made a mistake at my job, I was going to be fired or I was going to get in so much trouble. Or going to my manager to say I screwed this thing up was like the worst thing in the world, right? Like, I mean, and it was interesting because I've met other people along the way, some of whom also have church histories, who have this attitude where it's like, I have this weird irrational fear that if I make a mistake, I'm going to be fired. And I carried that for so long, even though I did a really great job and I would get great reviews. And, but then now I've worked for, more than a decade at a company where they're just sort of like, they do the debrief and the lessons learned. They want you to come forward. If you find something that's wrong, even if it's a mistake you made, they want you to bring it to a manager like immediately so that we can get this squared away. Of course, when you bring it to the manager, they want you to have investigated it, make sure you understand what actually happened, that you really are at fault in this, that you really did make an error. And also, what are the options now? Like, have you looked at potential? So you go to your manager prepared. You don't just go in there and say, I screwed this up. You go in and you say, look, I screwed this up. I did this thing and I didn't go back and check. And I know that's part of our process, but it's been really busy and this project's been really hectic. And so this thing happened. And so I did contact the vendor about it and they can do this for us, but it's going to, there'll be an additional cost. And but I don't have this horrible fear that I'm going to be like badly reprimanded or fired over it. Or, of course, I'm not like a surgeon or something. So it's not like, hey, I cut off the wrong arm. I hope that's okay. I found making proper steps to make sure that doesn't happen again. No, there are some jobs that are less forgiving, obviously, where making a mistake is more damaging than financial loss. But the point is that attitude of just judgment affected way more than just my religious life. It really was pervasive in how I thought other people judged me. And what's funny is throughout most of my career, people have been like, no, you do a great job. Like, I'm just great reviews, great, and yet that plagued me in my early career.
And that attitude is so corrosive no matter what organization you're in. It really it shuts down people asking the right questions.
Yeah.
And it also...
It's just awful to have good people hammering themselves like that.
Right. And it fosters a culture that promotes cover-ups.
Yep.
You have to hide every failure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that is very dangerous.
Maybe that's one thing that Catholicism did kind of right, because, and I hate to say that because somebody's going to quote me on that, but you could ask for forgiveness and it was granted. I don't know what that means exactly, but I feel like I have an easier time with admitting that I've done something wrong than a lot of people around me. And maybe, I don't know, maybe that's just me, but...
Yeah, I mean, the religion I was in, you could ask forgiveness too, but it just there was just this nitpicky judgment from the other members.
Oh well, with
it wasn't so much about God, even though God had these really strict rules. It's like, yeah, you could just go and ask forgiveness, and I don't think I felt like a lot of heat from Jesus once I got baptized, but I definitely, the way the church was, and I've used that example before though, of like how if your kid came to you and said that they were having suicidal thoughts, you would be concerned. You would say, well, we need to talk about this. Maybe I need to call somebody. We need to get some help and get some intervention here because I don't understand this, issue totally, but I care about you and I don't want you to die and I like having you around. And so we'll get this fixed, and whatever we need to do, that's what we'll do. But when the kid comes to you and says, I'm an atheist, it's just sort of like, get on board with the religion again, or just shut up, because I don't want your siblings to hear this. Don't you dare talk to them about it. And it's like it becomes this huge secret where you're a shame. You are a shame to the family. And so if in fact I thought your eternal soul was on the line and that you were going to suffer eternity or be obliviated for eternity or whatever I think is going to happen to you that isn't you're going to be with us in paradise, wouldn't I be more concerned about you than the child who's suicidal? Like you're going to have eternal, some kind of weird eternal condemnation, or I'll be separated from you eternally. And so but they don't treat it like real concern. It's just judgment, right? So I mean, that's kind of what I'm describing. There's this weird thing where they sell it like it's concern, but what really is happening in there is this condemnation that leads to shame. And that's what I see people over and over again describing about their religious experience, especially with fundamental religion.
Oh, yeah. But shame is the number one reason why I left the church. Like my whole life, I felt like I was the cliche analogy of a square peg being forced into a round hole.
But I mean, that whole thing was the basis for don't ask, don't tell. You know, don't talk about it. You know, we understand that you are, you know, this way, but don't talk about it. Don't tell anybody. Don't act on it. Don't do anything about it. And so basically it was officially you are to violate the Army's stated values about integrity every single day, because, you know, it's not that being gay was a big deal. It was that telling somebody about it was the big deal.
Right, because you had this huge debate about, well, should we allow gay people in the military? And it's like, they're in the military. I mean, the debate really isn't, or should they be in the military or not? It's should we just acknowledge it? You know? And what kind of problems is this going to cause? I don't know. What kind of problems are we running into? Because they're there. Right? I mean, are we running into problems here? You know, and you see this all the time where, I mean, just people freaking out and not wanting to talk about a thing, and in that case you have a situation where it's not even a problem. Right. The discussion would pretty much lead to there is no problem here. We're basically keeping people quiet and denying something that has been going on and has not been a problem.
Right. And then, you know, getting back to the Catholic Church, you have a situation that actually is a problem that lots of people know about with the child abuse, the sex abuse things, and the problem for the church is, well, we don't want to talk about it, or it's because we have gay priests. It's like, well, no, the gay priests aren't raping the little girls, you know, they're not impregnating teenagers, you know.
God. So, any last things you'd like to say, Ethan, about how people can contact?
Yeah, so Mormon Leaks is mormonleaks.io, Faith Leaks is faithleaks.org, and then Truth and Transparency Foundation, that's like the parent organization, that's the actual 501c3, is truthandtransparency.org. We're launching that initiative that I was telling you about removing the clergy exemption in the state of Utah. We're going to launch that on Wednesday, right after the election. Right.
Did you want to mention your cap?
Yeah, my hat is that. Yeah, just making sure. So I used to live in Pittsburgh, actually like 2 or 3 blocks away from the Tree of Life Synagogue, and that neighborhood is called Squirrel Hill, and it's my understanding that it in terms of like geographical space, it's the most densely populated Jewish neighborhood in the country. And if you're like, if you live in that neighborhood, you're either Jewish or you're a grad student. And that's why we were there. Was my wife was going to grad school, I mean, everywhere, walking down the street, past a lot of Jewish families on Saturday mornings, you'd always see them going to church. It was like Utah, except everyone was Jewish, right? So, and always the nicest people. Great. Anyway, so this particular shooting really hit home for me. While I didn't know the 11 people that passed away, I still consider them my neighbors, and so that's why I'm wearing my hat today out of solidarity for them.
I'd like to add to that solidarity. I'm the president of the board of Foundation Beyond Belief, and our development director, she's a member of that synagogue. And
wow.
Yeah, she's going through a hard time right now.
Wow.
And it's that, and then the way the media is treating it is just insulting. So my heart goes out to everybody that is affected by this. So you are going to be on Truth Wanted? Is that true?
Potentially, we were talking about it. Yesterday was the first time Dan brought it up, but that's probably in the near future. I'll be on there, yeah.
Truth Wanted is another ACA show, and it's one that focuses on street epistemology, and it's a call-in show. So if you're wanting to ask questions of Ethan, watch for that one, and he'll be on there, and you can call and ask him about the work he's doing and so forth. It's been an excellent show. This has been fascinating.
Thank you. I've had a lot of fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks, Jen, for coming and being a part of this. Thanks, Tracie,
Sure thing.
as always. The other side of the wall, the awesomest people in the whole wide world. They do all the hard work of making this thing happen. We just show up and talk. That's all we do. So just one final thought I'd like to leave you with, and that's we don't need a savior. We have each other. It's all we've ever had and all we'll ever need. Bye.